Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And without further ado, let's jump right into it. Let's preview the Georgia Bulldogs with our buddy Daniel Monroe, host of the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. Daniel, how are you, man? Welcome in.
I'm doing well, Chris. How are you doing tonight?
Doing good, man. Let's jump into it. Obviously, Georgia, one of the favorites in the SEC, obviously the favorite to win the SEC East, a top 10 team nationally. A lot of people expecting a team that can compete not only for the SEC crown, but for a playoff spot as well. What is the biggest storyline for the Georgia Bulldogs heading into this season in your mind?
Well, I think the biggest storyline depends on how you want to look at it, but the biggest storyline from a positive sense from the Georgia side is continuity at quarterback. Where there's a returning quarterback in Athens for the first time since Jake Fromm, and that was marred with all the controversy around Justin Fields and all of that. And so really this is the first season without a quarterback competition, without a quarterback controversy, without any question about who the starter is. JT Daniels has got the team. He performed really well in the last 4 games of the last season, the 4 games that he got to play in, including a win over Cincinnati, a really solid defense in the bowl game. And so expectations are high. I think, can Todd Monken turn the corner with this Georgia offense and produce something that Georgia fans have been looking for a while is the big question. The talent seems to be there. Certainly the talent at quarterback is there. The talented weapons around him are there. So can this Georgia offense take the next step? I think that will go a long way to determining how the team does.
It's very interesting because obviously there are so many weapons that they have. When we talk about the receivers, but in my mind, man, the bread and butter is and always has been that backfield with the Georgia Bulldogs. When Georgia is good, they are running the football, and man, they've got a 2-headed, 3-headed, 4-headed weapon back there in that backfield, multiple guys who can tote the rock. Is that what you're looking for this year, to maybe be more balanced? JT Daniels grabs all the headlines, but man, if they can have a dominant run game, it's just going to make them that much better.
Yeah, I think Georgia's always going to want to run the football. Kirby Smart's always going to want to run the football. But I think he also sees, and I think you see with the hire of a guy like Todd Monken, I think he sees what's happening around the landscape of college football as well. And I think he looks at certainly teams like Alabama or Ohio State or Clemson, who are not unbalanced by any stretch of the imagination, have great backs and run the ball well, but really are a dynamic, explosive offense. I think that's the key word, is just creating explosive plays. That's what college football is all about these days, is explosive plays. You can create those in the run game, create those in the pass game. Ultimately, you create them when you have mismatches. So, Zamir White, James Cook, 2 veterans coming back, and then Kenny McIntosh has been really solid for Georgia, and Kendall Milton, who a lot of people think is the most talented back in the backfield as a sophomore, and by the end of the season might be the starter and the one getting all the carries. I think what Clint and I have talked about on the podcast a lot is, can we find a back that can become that can separate himself from the herd? And it's nice to have a committee. It's nice to have a bunch of backs to keep people fresh, but ultimately, when you see these championship teams, you see a Travis Etienne on the team. You see a Clyde Edwards-Helaire on the team. You see backs that are dominant. And so, can Georgia have someone elevate themselves in the backfield is the big question when it comes to the tailbacks.
This defense, obviously, Georgia always very good defensively. They lost some pieces last year, but man, you bring back a big guy in Jordan Davis right there at the nose tackle spot in the middle of that defensive line. He's a force, and it starts with him, but looks like Georgia's going to have a really good defense once again this year.
I think a better defense certainly than last year. I don't know if we're talking about like 2017 type defense with Roquan Smith and Lorenzo Carter and that national championship team defense. But I do think the defensive front is as good as Georgia has ever had. You mentioned Jordan Davis. I think he's the best defensive lineman in college football, but he is by no means alone. Jalen Carter, very talented kid as a sophomore, freshman last year, going into sophomore year. And then guys like Trayvon Walker. You've got veterans on the defensive line. You've got edge rushers like Adam Anderson, who's been waiting for an opportunity behind Azeez Ojulari for the last couple seasons, and now he's going to get his. Got guys like Nolan Smith, and I mean, the list goes. The defensive front, really, there's questions in the back end on the defense, and then certainly you've got Nakobe Dean kind of anchoring everything in the middle. But I think the questions on the back end are more overblown than anything else. And I think the presence of the veterans on the defensive front is more than enough to make up for that. So I do expect Georgia's defense to take a big step forward from what it was in 2020 and hopefully be able to help that offense out a little bit and take a little bit of the pressure off JT Daniels from having to throw for 400 yards every game for us to win.
Let's talk expectations. I mean, I think everybody wants, in Georgia, the expectations are that this team wins the East. They get to Atlanta, maybe beat Alabama, get to the college football playoff. If they're there undefeated and lose to Bama, maybe they still get into the playoff. But expectations, I got to think, are sky high. And if they don't get there this year, does that start to turn the heat up on Kirby Smart?
Yeah, I mean, just to start with the expectations, you said it. This is Georgia. One, a place with great football tradition and a place that is a perennial contender in both the SEC and nationally. And if I may take a shot at my own fan base, also a place synonymous with ridiculous expectations year in and year out. And so you've got nothing short of not making the SEC championship game, but absolutely beating Alabama, winning the SEC, getting into the college football playoff, and ultimately competing for a national championship. That's what the expectations are every season in Athens, and this season is certainly no different. It seems the talent is in place. I'm a big believer in Kirby Smart. I think a lot of the narrative that gets built around him is lazy and sloppy and often under-researched from a national perspective, that this like Kirby recruits, but he can't develop. This Kirby can't win the big game type of, nonsense. Kirby's got more wins over ranked teams than many of his counterparts. He's put more guys in the first round than many of his counterparts. And a lot of those 3- and 4-star prospects that he's putting in the first round. So I don't think there's any heat on Kirby Smart. I think he's the guy, and I think you saw, even with the Mark Richt tenure at Georgia, that it's not going to be a short leash. This is not going to be a quick turnaround, and you're not going to be hearing Kirby Smart's job is in jeopardy if Georgia loses to Alabama in the SEC championship game. It's several more years before you're going to be hearing that kind of narrative. And yeah, I think rightfully so. If Kirby's not able to take these teams and win some titles, then people probably should be talking about that, but it's way down the road.
Daniel Monroe, host of the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. Thanks so much for the time, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man, Chris, anytime.
All right, we'll be back right after this. Need to remind you about our friends over at rockauto.com. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it is now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. Why would you endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing from the brands that they want, from the warehouses that they want? Go to rockauto.com right now. You save time and money when you use Rock Auto. They are a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you can need, from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpets. Go explore their easy-to-use website today. Find the solution to your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck, and make sure you write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so that they know that we sent you. An amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com. Rolling along here, Locked On SEC, and a pleasure now to be joined with Brandon Olsen, host of Locked On Gators, and moving around, previewing the entire SEC. Today we're previewing the SEC East, And so, Brandon, we start with the Gators, and I just start by asking, what's the biggest storyline for the Gators and Dan Mullen heading into this season?
I think the biggest storyline really with us is what's going to happen offensively, because, of course, we had a ton of talent last year. We had 3 first-round picks just on offense in general with Kyle Trask, Kadarius Toney, and Kyle Pitts. And it's like, who's going to step up and replace them? Because we also had wide receiver Trayvon Grimes, went to the NFL undrafted with the Eagles. And it's Emory Jones replacing Kyle Trask. And it's just such a big difference from Kyle Trask, who's very pocket passer style. He's not mobile pretty much whatsoever, no matter how many QB draws Dan Mullen wants to run with him. And now we've got a much more mobile quarterback that's more in the style of Dan Mullen's offense historically, of getting your quarterback in space using the option-heavy offense. And having someone try to replace Kyle Pitts, it's not possible. Dan Mullen said it last year, due to unicorn. Like, you cannot replace him easily, but Kimura Gamble is going to give it his best shot and try to get a go from it. And then defensively, it's just, there were so many disappointments last year that now it's all about trying to step up, and hopefully the offense being not better, but on the field longer will give our defense a little more rest and give them a little bit of a break, and hopefully, please God, hopefully play better than they did last year.
I know with the Gators last year, they didn't even try to run the ball at times. I mean, the run game was not a part of the offense. And granted, look, Kyle Trask was throwing for a ton of yardage. Do you think they try to be a little bit more balanced this year? Because, man, it's been, 5-6 years since the Gators have had a 1,000-yard rusher.
Yeah. I don't think we'll have a 1,000-yard rusher this year, but I think our rushing offense is going to be much better than it has been in kind of previous years, just because we have Emory Jones is going to be a big part of the rushing attack. Anthony Richardson, the backup quarterback, or as Dan Mullen likes to call him, the second starter, going to be a big part of the rushing attack. Damian Pierce, Naquan Wright, Malik Davis, DeMarcus Bowman. We have so many running backs that are going to see playing time, where I don't think we're going to have a single 1,000-yard rusher, but I think efficiency-wise, we're going to be a lot more efficient on the ground. It's still, like, the offensive line is still a big question mark for us, because last year they were horribly inconsistent. This year they'll hopefully be a bit better. Losing Stone Forsythe and Brett Hay hurt a bit, but hopefully we'll be able to kind of scheme better rushing attacks and get more involved on the ground. I think this year the plan is to be not necessarily a run-heavy team, but more run-focused than we were last year or even the year before that, and kind of keep the ball a little bit more, because, yeah, just getting the opposing team on the field so often, or getting the opposing offense on the field so often, really killed us with how poor our defense was.
All right, let's get to it, Brandon. Ceiling and floor, best case scenario, what is it for the Gators? Is it beating Georgia again and representing the East and getting to Atlanta again?
Yeah. I think that this is – I think the Gators are kind of getting overlooked in a way. That could be homerish, but I think they're getting overlooked in a way just because of all of the turnover. And that's, again, it's warranted, but I think it's being overplayed a bit. Like, this is a team that I legitimately think is a top 7 team in all of college football. Like, I have high expectations for the Gators, and usually I'm not that kind of guy, but I have high expectations for this team. I'm expecting a lot from them. And yeah, I want to see a playoff run this year. Like, I'm tired of the Gators not being in the playoffs. It's what I want this year, and it's what I'm hoping for. And
wanted to get your thoughts as well, Brandon. Transition a little bit. South Carolina, we don't have a locked-on host for the Gamecocks, but I know it's a team you keep an eye on. Thoughts on the South Carolina Gamecocks and what their biggest storyline is heading into the season?
I think it's got to be Shane Beamer stepping in as the new head coach from Oklahoma. It's going to be a whole new era for South Carolina. We know them typically as a team that plays good defense, or tries to focus on playing good defense and runs the ball a lot. But I think Shane Beamer is going to bring in a little bit more of that Oklahoma passing style offense and hopefully open things up. But the question mark is, like, their offensive line last year was atrocious. They've got so many questions at quarterback. They've got Dottie coming off an injury, Zeb Nolan, Jason Brown. They haven't really named a starter because Dottie got injured. They have Kevin Harris at running back, is just so talented. He's going to be a beast again, like with or without the offensive line. He's just one of those running backs that it doesn't matter because he'll turn nothing into something. And he is going to be just so good again this year. And offensively, like I know that Shane Beamer is going to want to throw the ball and stretch the field a little bit, but I think it's still going to be Kevin Harris that has to carry the load to really make this offense be productive in any way. And then defensively, they're replacing J.C. Horn, Ernest Jones, and Israel Mukwamu. And I mean, that all got drafted. And sure, like they've got talent, but it's really up to Enegbar and Strachan to really step up for this Gamecocks pass rush, because the secondary, like I just mentioned, like J.C. Horn and Mukwamu are NFL caliber corners. They both got drafted. They both left. Granted, there was like the opt-out last year, of course, but this is a team that needs their pass rush to step up, and hopefully it can happen. But I don't know. It's a team in turmoil, really, and that's what's kind of not upsetting but disappointing. That they're a fun team like usually, or they try to be, and yeah, they've just got a lot of question marks going into this year, and it's going to be a few years of rebuilding, I think, for Shane Beamer.
Yeah, and the question is, can they play spoiler and upset somebody this year in year one of Shane Beamer? That will be interesting as well. Brandon Olsen, host of Locked On Gators. Let our listeners know where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, you can find any of my written content with Whole Nine Sports. It's WHOLENINE Sports, and I'll be covering the draft and actually Big 12 this year.
Brandon, thanks for the time, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
It is that time of year again, folks. All eyes turning to football as teams are back on the gridiron. College football games getting underway this weekend in week 0. Next week, we got the week 1, and then we got the NFL. As always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. You get all the latest updated odds, props, and contests, including online's biggest $500,000 NFL mega contest and the world's largest $200,000 NFL Survivor contest, open now at BetOnline. Head to their website right now. You can do so on your mobile device. Sign up today and receive a 100% welcome bonus when you use our promo code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON. From football, basketball, boxing, even your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait. Take advantage of all the great offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way for you to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, they are your online sportsbook experts. Rolling along here, Locked On SEC, doing our SEC East preview, and a pleasure now to be joined by our buddy Eric Cain at _Cainer on Twitter. He is the host of Locked On Vols, covering the Tennessee Volunteers. Eric, welcome in, man. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm doing even better now that it's finally football season, so I'm excited about that.
It is exciting, man. It is upon us. So we start here. Eric, what is the biggest storyline for the Tennessee Volunteers heading into the start of the season?
Yeah, the word is new. New head coach, new offense, new quarterback. This I think everybody's intrigued to see how fast this offense is going to go. And it might not be as fast game 1 as well it might be in game 6 or game 7 or in year 2 or year 3. But it's going to be pretty fast. It was very, very fast in the spring game. What quarterback is going to be operating that offense? My expectation is Joe Milton, formerly of the Michigan Wolverines. He's a big guy, big arm, very athletic. He can move as well. And so I think he gives Tennessee a number of options there at the quarterback spot. But also, how some of these younger guys and Jalen Hyatt and Jabari Small in the backfield, and really just to see how this offense comes together with, again, who I believe will be the quarterback in Joe Milton.
Yeah, it's been an interesting offseason of a lot of quarterbacks leaving, a lot of new quarterbacks coming in. What is it that you think Josh Heupel likes most about Milton? We've heard he's got a little bit of a dart of an arm. Is that what you guys have seen and heard so far?
Oh yeah, I mean it's by and large the strongest arm. He takes the hands off the receiver sometimes whenever he's throwing slant routes, which could be a good or a bad thing. But he throws the ball hard. It's not even close. And I think that he was a little amped up early on in camp just to get out there and kind of prove himself. Again, a guy that didn't have spring practice, but has been here on campus since really the start of May and June, kind of learning and preparing, and then obviously went through the summer workouts. But from everything we've heard, we're not able to see scrimmages, but he's commanded himself well in scrimmages. He's had a couple of nice runs. He's made a couple of nice decisions. And I don't think this quarterback battle was Joe Milton, far and away the best one. I think Hendon Hooker was extremely close. I think Harrison Bailey improved a lot, but I'd probably put Harrison Bailey third in line. But I just think Tennessee likes the potential of what Joe Milton can be and what it can mean for this offense if he's able to protect the football and make the right decisions.
Do you get the vibe that in a perfect world, Josh Heupel wants to pick one guy and stick with him all year, and he's the guy? Because I think Tennessee fans, man, since the Josh Dobbs days, are just kind of over the quarterback carousel.
Yeah, I mean, there's been – I want to say 3 quarterbacks who have started games each of the last 2 years. Before that, 2 quarterbacks, dating back since Dobbs. And you're right. Alex Golesh, offensive coordinator, Josh Heupel, of course, head coach. They both said in the media day press conferences, kind of opening up camp, they want to pick one guy. They want to play one guy. The old saying is, if you have 2 quarterbacks, do you really have one? Now, they left open the possibility, a slight possibility, that another guy could come in and maybe have some packages and some certain plays that kind of like what you see with Dan Mullen, with Emory Jones the past couple of years with Kyle Trask, but not saying these two are on that level whatsoever, but that could be a possibility. But really, Joe Milton is the guy that would be a package guy, in my opinion. You could run the speed option with Hendon Hooker, and he can throw the ball certainly, but I think Tennessee wants to pick its guy. It wants to play 3 quarterbacks in the opener because hopefully Tennessee will be kind of well on its way there. You can get some more game tape on all 3 of those guys, but I think the Volunteers want to pick one guy and stick with them, and hopefully that that is the guy that can lead them throughout the entire season and potentially on into next season.
We've been talking with some teams about ceilings. Let me talk floor for the Tennessee Volunteers this year. Is the floor, bare minimum, are fans hoping 6 wins, get to a bowl game, and maybe start to build some momentum?
Yeah, that's the expectation. I think if you ask any Tennessee fan, they'll say, I just want to become bowl eligible. Now, Tennessee with the NCAA investigations going on, that's still not resolved. Potentially wouldn't even be able to go a bowl game this year. We'll have to see about that. But being able to qualify for a bowl game, seeing an improved level of play, both offensively and defensively. But under Jim Chaney and Jeremy Pruitt, Tennessee's offense, average like 22 points a game. And I think Tennessee's offense can easily average a touchdown better and maybe be pushing 30 this year. That defense might give up 30 as well. But I think 6 wins is a good goal for Tennessee. That's where I had the Volunteers at 6-6 on the year. I think the floor, honestly, if you're talking worst case scenario, I still think it's 5 wins because that's winning 3 of your non-conference games and losing to Pittsburgh and then losing the other toss-up games while beating Vanderbilt in South Carolina in the SEC. So I'm expecting 6 wins. If everything goes right, maybe 7. But I think this team is good for 6.
The first things first, you got to beat Bowling Green. You guys get Bowling Green first start of college football, the first Thursday out of the gates. It's kind of fun to get the first game out of the way and be on that national stage.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Ohio State plays Minnesota that night, so there'll be some eyes over there, but Tennessee's going to be owning the SEC that night, and it's going to be on the SEC network. Tom Hart will have the call, and it'll be a good time. It should be a game that Tennessee, does well in, and if Georgia State taught you anything 2 years ago, you can't take any game for granted. I understand that, but statistically, Bowling Green, one of the worst football programs in the country last year. We're talking like 129, in terms of where they were in total offense. So you should be able to work on your offense, work out some kinks, get a lot of guys in, and kind of treat it as more film session, not as a practice because that's not what it's going to be, but it should be a good night to kick off the Josh Heupel era, show off that new offense, and put some points on the board.
We gave you a stretch assignment, Eric. You're a host of Locked On Vols. You're not far down the road away from Vanderbilt. We don't have a Locked On Vanderbilt host, but I will ask you for Vanderbilt. In your mind, what's the biggest storyline for that team heading into the SEC season?
Yeah, much like Tennessee, just kind of trying to start over. Vanderbilt, I think Derek Mason is a good coach, but obviously it didn't work out there, and he's off to defensive coordinator over at Auburn. And Clark Lee comes in. He's implemented some rather unique offseason strategies in terms of owning. You have to earn your locker. You have to earn your number that you're going to wear, across your back and stuff like that. So, but when you're Vanderbilt and you're literally starting from the ground up, I think that's okay. It seems like at SEC media days, Bradley Ashmore, a sophomore offensive lineman, really loved that mentality. He loved everything that, Clark Lee's bringing to the table. The thing about Vanderbilt that they have, and they always have it for some reason, whereas teams like Tennessee search for it all the time, Vanderbilt's got a quarterback. Ken Seals, he can sling it around. He put up some numbers last year as a true freshman. I expect him to get better as a sophomore, protect the football a little bit more. And, when you have a quarterback, you give yourself a chance. And I'm not expecting Vanderbilt to win a whole lot of games this year, but you return your top 3 receivers, you return a couple of guys on the offensive line, and a pretty good quarterback offensively, you'll have a chance to go and score some points this year. But it's reboot, it's start over time for Vanderbilt, much like Tennessee, as they try to kick off the season off and their new head coaching eras with a win come next weekend.
Eric Cain, host of Locked On Vols. Thanks so much for the time, man. Appreciate it.
Hey, Chris, appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Continuing on with our preview of the SEC East, and a pleasure now to be joined by John Miller, host of Locked On Mizzou, covering the Missouri Tigers. John, welcome in, buddy. How are you, man?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me on the show, man. I'm loving this preview already.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. The SEC East, a lot of good teams, and there's some teams in the East that I call sneaky, and Missouri is one of those teams that could be very sneaky. They were sneaky last year, beating LSU, a team that a lot of people didn't think they could beat. Obviously, stubbed their toe a little bit down the stretch last year. But in your mind, what's the biggest storyline for the Missouri Tigers heading into this season?
Well, I think everything you said was right on. First of all, I think Missouri outpaced my expectations, and I'm usually an overly optimistic type Missouri fan, but I tell you, the big story of the offseason has got to be the new defensive coordinator, Steve Wilks, formerly of the Arizona Cardinals. In fact, he had one season as their head coach. Kind of a tough spot and year for Steve Wilks. He came in right before Cliff Kingsbury, Kyler Murray, that whole deal. But you know what? Last season, Missouri ran a lot of man-to-man defense, just sort of predictably over and over again. Steve Wilks going to come in with a much more zone-focused type scheme, and really it's going to be up to him to see if that Missouri defense can be much improved. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, Connor Bazelak, despite him being the freshman of the year offensively in the conference last season, well, you know what? A lot of people probably forget that he actually didn't start the first 2 games last season. So with a little bit more continuity, remember Drinkwitz was a new coach last season, COVID-19, not a lot of time to implement the new offense. I think continuity, if you're going to be bullish on Missouri, that's a big reason to be so.
Larry Roundtree, the running back last year, was a big part of this offense. He's now gone. I know Tyler Beatty, people have been very complimentary of him. Is he going to be the workhorse in that backfield this year?
He'll be the number 1 back without a doubt. Now, he got a little dinged up in one of Mizzou's most recent practices, so we'll keep an eye on that. It doesn't sound too serious so far, but definitely don't expect a Larry Roundtree-like performance from any Missouri running back, just in terms of volume. Missouri ran the ball, 20 to 25 times just with Roundtree in a lot of games this past season. Don't expect that to happen again. More of a multi-back approach, but certainly Beatty is a guy with a lot of talent, an explosive player, probably a better pass receiver than Roundtree, too.
I got to meet Eli Drinkwitz at SEC Media Days and got to interview him one-on-one. I really liked him. He seems like a very personable guy and an easy guy to root for. I really liked when they started fall camp a few weeks ago. He was very, honest, saying he wasn't happy with where the team was. He thought they had a terrible practice, and you don't normally hear that from coaches. So normally you keep that under wraps, but I like that he addressed it head on and met with the media and said he was not pleased with where the team was. Does it feel like he's creating that culture that he's bringing over from Appalachian State, that it's really starting to settle in now in year 2?
Honestly, it really does feel like his team here in year 2, just sort of reading between the lines on what the assistant coaches are saying, what all the players are saying. It just seems like this team is, to steal, I guess, a line from the University of Minnesota, they're all rowing the boat in the same direction right now. Now, will that necessarily translate into huge success in 2021? We'll have to see, but I think the groundwork is definitely being laid for this Missouri program. Good recruiting and good vibes just from the current roster as well.
their first couple years in the SEC, and man, it's been almost a decade now, they kind of grabbed some people's attention. Matty Mock and those teams, they were winning the East, and everybody was a little surprised by it and taken aback. In your mind, what is a good year for Missouri this year? Because we know Georgia is considered a force. We know Kentucky's supposed to be really good. Florida, Dan Mullen, they don't seem to be going anywhere. But what, in your mind, is a really good year for Missouri this year?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, I think one of our sponsors, Chris, over at BetOnline.ag, I think that 7 number is what I last saw over there as far as win totals for the season. I think 8 would be a good season for Missouri. I really do. And I think 9 would be an outstanding season. And so anything in like the 6-6 range, that might be a little disappointing. But to me, Missouri, it's an interesting year for them because they have a chance to be good, in my opinion. But at the same time, if maybe it's a little disappointing, no reason to jump off the Drinkwitz bandwagon whatsoever. Remember, Bazelak, still an underclassman, still lots of time for this team to grow.
Talking with John Miller, host of Locked On Mizzou. We don't have a host for Locked On Kentucky, but I asked you to do a little bit of extra homework assignment for us here and just kind of touch a little bit on the Kentucky Wildcats. In your mind, what's the biggest storyline for Kentucky heading into this season?
Well, if it's the new defensive coordinator for Mizzou, it's got to be the new offensive coordinator for the Kentucky Wildcats. Enter Liam Cohen, a guy under Sean McVay's tutelage out in the Los Angeles Rams, among other places. A young guy with hopefully some more, if you're a Kentucky Wildcats fan, certainly some more passing game-oriented style concepts and just a more passing-heavy system, because as solid as Kentucky has been the last few seasons, and honestly as much of a thorn in the side as they've been for the Missouri Tigers the last few seasons, you got to give Mark Stoops all the credit in the world. There's still going to be just a really, really hard glass ceiling that they're going to continue to run into if they can't pass the football. I mean, really, that team is just so old school the last really 2 to 3 seasons when it comes to being able to throw a forward pass. That's the thing that's got to change. It sounds like they got a new quarterback in Will Levis, but you know what? That doesn't even sound completely settled either. So as a Missouri fan, I'm frankly glad that we have Kentucky second game early in the season. I think that's actually an advantage for Missouri because right now I think at least offensively we have better continuity. Oh, and by the way, defensively, Kentucky lost a lot of guys to the NFL too. A first-round draft pick, Jamin Davis, second-round pick, Kelvin Joseph, a corner. So they got a lot to replace on that side of the ball too.
They certainly do. We're talking with John Miller, host of Locked On Mizzou. Last thing for you, John, just kind of getting your thoughts on the conference as a whole. I mean, does it feel like it's Georgia to beat in the East for everybody?
It sure does. It just seems like you got to, at least at this point, having seen nobody play. They have the most talent. They're recruiting at a top, literally 3 level for 5 straight seasons practically. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Chris. But, Florida's obviously a recruiting machine too, but they're just not at that level. Also having lost Kyle Trask, Kadarius Toney. It just seems like that's a little bit too much to replace for me to pick anybody but Georgia at this point.
John Miller, host of Locked On Mizzou. John, thanks so much for the time, man. Appreciate it.
Hey, appreciate you, Chris. Anytime, man.
All right, that is just about going to do it for this edition of Locked On SEC. Appreciate you guys for listening as we previewed all the SEC East teams. Tomorrow, we'll transition over and preview all the SEC West teams, all 7 teams. No, we're not counting Oklahoma and Texas yet. They're not invited to the party just yet. But appreciate you guys for listening, subscribing to Locked On SEC, and appreciate all our great hosts along the Locked On Podcast Network. I am Chris Gordy. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. And a reminder, betting on the SEC does not have to be a guessing game. If you listen to the new Locked On Bets podcast hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling, get Lee's Lock of the Day. Follow Locked On Bets podcast brought to you by BetOnline.ag wherever you get your podcasts. Talk to you guys tomorrow.